Okay, picture this scenario for a second, and I really want you to try and put yourself there, because the source material we are looking at today, it just starts with this visceral, almost, cinematic nightmare.
Hmm.
You've just been in a collision. Doesn't matter whose fault. Maybe it's a busy highway. Maybe it's a quiet back road at night. The metal has finally stopped screeching. The car is still. And you just have that moment of absolute silence.
It's that vacuum of sound, isn't it? Right before the panic really sets in, that moment where your brain is just trying to catch up with what just happened.
Right. And the text describes the people inside you, your passengers, as stunned or disoriented. You're checking your limbs, trying to figure out which way is up. But then, in all that confusion, something changes.
The smell of smoke.
Exactly. You smell smoke, or you see that little flicker of orange reflecting off the windshield. A fire has broken out.
And it's a terrifying image, honestly.
Uh,
It's one of the worst case scenarios you can imagine. The source we're analyzing today, it really emphasizes that when fire enters the equation, the situation changes instantly.
It's not a traffic accident anymore.
No, it becomes, as the text puts it, a literal race against time.
And that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. We're doing a deep dive into this very specific, very high-stakes set of safety guidelines called vehicle collision hazards that can cause fires.
Ugh.
Our mission is pretty simple. We want to bridge the gap between that moment of freezing up, that panic, and knowing exactly what to do.
Exactly. The goal isn't to scare you, though. The subject is heavy. The goal, according to the source, is to give you clear, practical guidance. We want to get you to a place where if this ever happens, you act with, what does the text call it? Calm, purpose, and confidence.
Because the alternative is just relying on instinct, and as we're about to find out, our instincts in a car fire are often, well, they're dead wrong.
Oh, they can be. Some of the things you might instinctively do could make the situation so much worse. The source notes that flames can erupt with terrifying speed. So we're going to break this down.
Okay, let's start with that immediate aftermath. The text brings up this idea of a mental fog.
Right.
It says people are stunned or disoriented. And I feel like we all underestimate how debilitating that really is. We all think we're going to be the action hero,
But biology just works against you in that moment. After a collision, your body is flooded with cortisol, with adrenaline. You're in shock. Your cognitive function actually plummets.
You get television.
Television, your hearing might dampen. That's why the source emphasizes that knowing what to do next can save lives. You can't rely on your brain to improvise a brilliant solution right then and there. You need a preloaded script.
It's like muscle memory. You don't want to be thinking, you want to be doing. So the first step isn't even grabbing an extinguisher.
Yeah.
It's an assessment step.
Correct. The source material draws a really hard line between two very different scenarios. It says the intensity and size of the fire will determine the course to follow.
So it forces you to make a choice right away.
A binary choice, yeah. It puts the threat into two buckets. Scenario A, an intense, sizable fire, and Scenario B, a smaller, contained fire.
And that one distinction changes everything.
It dictates the entire strategy. It's a fork in the road. You treat an intense fire like a small one. You're putting yourself in danger. You treat a small one like a huge one. Well, you might lose the vehicle when you could have saved it.
Though, to be clear, personal safety always comes first.
Always. The text is very, very clear on that.
Okay, let's walk down that first pass in. Scenario A, the really scary one. An intense, sizable fire. I'm picturing flames, already covering the hood, maybe licking at the windshield.
Right. And for that, the guidance is explicit. It's simple. Get out. Immediate evacuation.
Sure.
But there's a specific warning here that I think is so important psychologically. The text says, do not return to the vehicle to collect possessions.
Sitting here, that sounds so obvious. Of course I wouldn't go back for my phone. But in the moment, I can almost feel that pull, that weird instinct to grab your stuff.
It's a profound materialism trap. And it's really common in emergency psychology. We're just conditioned to protect our property. In that chaos, your brain is looking for something familiar to latch on to.
Something to control.
Precisely. I can't fix this crash, but I can save my laptop. But the source warns against this because, again, it's a race against time. Those 3 or 4 seconds you spend reaching into the back seat could be everything.
So the rule is, cut your losses. Stuff is replaceable. You are not. Now, once you're out, the source doesn't just say, stand back. It gets very specific about distance.
It does. It says you must stand a long distance away, and it defines long as at least 100 feet.
100 feet. That's a third of a football field. That's much further than just stepping onto the shoulder of the road.
It is. Most people would stand maybe, what, 10, 15 feet away. They want to stay close. The text is telling you to get way back.
Why that specific distance? Is it just the heat?
It's about ballistics. The source is clear. It's due to the threat of an explosion.
An explosion. Okay, so now we're moving from just fire safety to, what, blast trauma? That feels like something out of a movie.
But it's very real. I mean, think about what a car is. It's not just a metal box. It's a collection of pressurized systems. You've got the fuel tank, obviously.
Sure.
But you also have pressurized struts in the hood and trunk. You have tires, which are basically pressurized rubber bombs if they get hot enough. You've got airbags with chemical explosives.
So the car can create its own shrapnel.
Exactly. If you're standing 20 feet away thinking you're safe from the flames, you're still in the danger zone. A tire exploding can send debris flying with lethal force. That's why at 100 feet, it gives you a buffer.
That is a sobering thought. It's not just the fire reaching you, it's the car reaching you.
Right. So the takeaway for the big fire is simple. Get out, forget your stuff, and run 100 feet.
Okay, so that's the worst case. Let's pivot to scenario B, the smaller contained fire. This sounds a little more nuanced. Maybe a wisp of smoke from a wheel well?
It is, yeah. And the source suggests you may actually be able to do something here, but with very strict caveats. It says you can try to put it out if you have the correct type of fire extinguisher and can get to it safely.
Safely is the key word there. But here's where the source gave me a real aha moment. I think most people assume if they don't have that red canister in the trunk, and let's be honest, most of us don't. They're just helpless.
Right, you just have to watch it burn.
But the text suggests an improvised tool that is literally everywhere.
Yes, this is fascinating, and it's so empowering. The text says, sand and earth can also be used.
Dirt. Just literal dirt from the side of the road.
It makes perfect sense if you think about the fire triangle, right? Fire needs oxygen, fuel, and heat. Take one of those away, the fire dies.
And dirt attacks the oxygen.
Exactly. You smother a small fire with sand or earth, you cut off its air supply. It's a physical barrier. It's a primitive method, sure, but it's incredibly effective for small fires.
I love that because it gives you agency. You aren't helpless. You can scoop up handfuls of dirt, and you might just stop it from becoming that intense, sizable fire.
You could, but there's a strategy to it. You don't just run up blindly. The source advises standing upwind of the airflow.
Okay, let's unpack that. Upwind. So the wind is at my back, blowing toward the fire.
Correct. And the source gives two really practical reasons for this. First, it keeps you free of any smoke. And we need to remember, car smoke isn't like campfire smoke. It's burning plastic, rubber, toxic chemicals.
Right, they'll choke you. You can't see, you can't breathe.
Exactly. And the second reason is that standing upwind will direct the heat away from you. If you stand downwind, the wind is just pushing a wall of heat right into your face. You won't be able to get close enough to do any good.
So even when you're just throwing dirt, strategy matters. Wind at your back. It's tactical.
It's a simple rule, but in that high-stress moment, having a mantra like, wind at my back, can be a stabilizing thought. It's a procedure to follow.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is maybe the most critical part of this whole deep dive. We've talked about what to do, but the source is so aggressive about what not to do.
Yes, the don'ts.
And these are things that, honestly, I think a lot of people would instinctively try.
And that's why they're so dangerous. Our intuition can lead us so far astray when you're dealing with the physics of a car fire.
The first one is about the engine. You see smoke coming from under the hood. What's the first thing anyone does when their car acts up?
Pop the hood. It's a reflex.
You want to see the problem.
Right. I need to see it to fix it. But the source is emphatic. If located in the engine bay, do not lift the hood.
Why? I mean, don't you need to get the extinguisher or the dirt to the fire?
It's that oxygen issue again. Think of the engine bay as a sealed box. The fire in there is struggling. It's choked. It's oxygen-starved. It wants to grow, but it can't breathe.
And lifting the hood is like opening the vents on a furnace.
It's much worse. It creates a sudden, massive rush of fresh air. It's similar to a backdraft. The text warns this will make the situation instantly worse. You are literally feeding the fire.
You could turn a smolder into a fireball.
Right in your face. So you leave the hood closed, let it choke. If you have an extinguisher, you try to spray through the grill, through any gaps you can find, but you keep that lid down.
Okay, that's a big one. But the next warning might be even more critical because it involves something we're taught from. Well, from kindergarten. Fire means use water.
Ah, yes. The water trap. The source could not be clearer. In all caps, it says, do not use water to put out the fire.
Do not use water. That feels so wrong to even say. If I have a water bottle, my first instinct would be to dump it on the flames.
And it comes down to what's actually burning. In a car, you're not dealing with a paper fire. It's a Class B fire. Oil, gasoline, brake fluid. The source specifically mentions if oil is alight, it will cause the flame to flare up.
It's like a grease fire in the kitchen, right?
No.
You never throw water on a grease fire.
It's the exact same principle, but let's explain why so it really sticks.
Yeah.
Oil and water don't mix, and water is denser than oil. So if you dump water on burning oil, the water just sinks straight to the bottom.
Okay, so the water goes under the oil. Why the flare-up?
Because that oil is incredibly hot, way hotter than the boiling point of water. So the water sinks, hits that superheated surface, and instantly boils.
It flashes to steam.
And when water turns to steam, it expands about 1,700 times its original volume. That expansion happens in a fraction of a second. It basically explodes from underneath the oil, launching all of that burning oil into the air.
Wow. So you're not putting it out, you're making a fire grenade.
You're splashing liquid fire everywhere. Onto you, onto other parts of the car, and the source adds another consequence. It could also spread any fuel that is alight to other areas.
Because the water flows.
Right. It flows across the pavement, and it carries the burning gasoline right along with it on top, maybe towards the fuel tank.
That's a disaster. You're becoming a transport system for the fire.
You are. You're turning a contained problem into a spreading one.
So let's just synthesize this, because this is really life or death stuff. We have two huge instincts. Check the engine and throw water on it. And the source says both are dead wrong.
They are critical errors. They're errors born of good intentions, but they lead to just disastrous outcomes. You have to override that instinct with knowledge, keep the hood down, and never, ever use water.
It really highlights why we do these deep dives. In the moment, you don't have time to Google the physics of an oil fire. You just have to know.
You have to know. And that brings us right back to the beginning, that mental state. If you know these rules 100 feet back, wind at your back, no water, no hood, you aren't stunned anymore. You're executing a plan.
You're switching from panic mode to protocol mode.
Exactly.
So let's just recap the whole flow for everyone listening. You're in a collision, you see a flame, run the checklist.
Step 1, assess. Is it an intense big fire, or is it small and contained?
If it's intense.
Get out, now. Leave everything. Run at least 100 feet away to get out of that explosion radius.
Well, if it's small.
You assess your safety. If you can, approach from upwind wind at your back. Use an extinguisher if you have one, or smother it with sand and earth to cut off the oxygen.
And the absolute do not ever list.
Never lift the hood. Don't feed it oxygen, and never use water. Don't spread the fuel or cause that steam explosion.
Simple, clear, and absolutely vital. The source keeps talking about avoiding additional explosions or hazards. It's about not making a bad day worse.
That's the core of it, really. Stop the cascade of failure.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thing to think about. The source material asks this really interesting rhetorical question near the beginning. It asks, why do some crashes ignite while others do not?
It's a question that haunts safety engineers.
It really does, because you can have a massive pile up, just mangled metal everywhere and no fire, and then you can have a minor fender bender that just bursts into flames. There's this element of randomness to it.
The variables are just too complex. The angle of impact, a spark hitting a fuel line just right.
And that's the thought I want to leave you with. Since we can't predict the fire, since we can't control the physics of the crash itself, the only variable we truly have control over is our own preparedness. The randomness is exactly why this mental preparation matters.
You can't control the spark, but you can control what you do in the seconds after. That's the only thing in your hands.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay safe out there, drive carefully, and keep this knowledge in your back pocket. Hopefully you'll never need it.
Indeed. Stay safe.
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.